third speaker is Robert Hoffman.
What I'm going to do is tell you a little story, I guess, about some of the work that we've been doing. It really had its roots in the limits to growth study of a long time ago. And I became interested in the dynamics of economic systems. And I was fascinated by their World 3 model that was the basis for the limits to growth study. We've built more than 50 simulation models of various kinds over the last 10 or 15 years. We started off building a simulation model, so this would be the early 90s, that took as its starting point the World 3 model with the message of the limits to growth. Incidentally, the limits to growth, of course, has enjoyed now a huge revitalization. It's interesting to watch, although that model is now 1972, more than 30 years old, and nothing much has happened in between. This is the little model that we built, and think of this as being now in the early 90s. And I'll explain it a little bit because all of the information that I'm going to show you comes right out of this little model. And so you can see in the top left-hand corner is the population model. And this is all at the global scale. So what I'm going to do is put some of this numerically in a global context. In here there's a cascade of calculations. So you have a population of people now coming down the center. They require two kinds of things. They require food, and they require what I've labeled as artifacts. So houses and cars and buildings and all of the stuff of society. Those are stocks. What's required is not production, as economists would say, but stocks. Stocks of houses, stocks of vehicles, stocks of infrastructure, etc. Those things, following down, there are little submodels that deal with the manufacturing, if you like, or the production of food. And the production, what I've called euphemistically bricks, because I had the notion of a Lego brick running through my mind when I designed this model. So a Lego brick is something out of which everything can be made. You just put them together in different patterns and you can have a vehicle and you can have a building. So in this little model we have bricks, and these bricks are made out of a combination of things, and they come from the resource base. And you can see now the resource base, there are four components in this resource base. There is a source of a non-renewable material, so our bricks are going to be made out of that. There's a forest, which is the source of potentially something that can be used for fuel, so you can burn it, or you can use it as a material. There's an agricultural component, which clearly provides the stuff out of which food is made. And there are some energy resources that are both renewable and non-renewable, potentially. And so this is a cascade of calculations that starts with the population. It says, well then, given a material standard of living, how much manufacturing do we put in place? And then it says, how much do we have to draw from the resource base? There are limits in the resource base. There's a fixed amount of land, and there's a fixed amount of oil and gas and so on that can be produced from this resource base. This particular model makes no attempt to equilibrate what is required to support the population of people and what can be taken from that resource base. So at the end of a sequence of calculations, there's a report called attention that says if there were shortfalls in the resource base, tell us about it, and then we, the user of the model, can experiment with what do you have to do to resolve these various tensions. And I'm going to take you through a bit of information that's coming out of this model from a business as usual scenario. First graph is the population of people at the global scale. I've called this a business as usual projection, and you can see that it grows to 12 billion by about 2080 before it levels off. And you'll immediately say, well, Susan talked about 9 billion, and the word these days seems to be in the neighborhood of 9 billion. How could I possibly have gotten to 12 billion? Well, we can take a look. And there are really only two assumptions that go into these cohort population calculations. The first is total period fertility. The black curve is the historical values of fertility. You can see decreasing from, in the neighborhood of 1950, from, in the neighborhood of 6. And in our business as usual simulation, we've taken total period fertility down to what is commonly thought of as being replacement, 2.1. And so this is still a continuing and fairly drastic decline in fertility. The other assumption that is made has to do with mortality. Here summarized as life expectancy from birth. And you can see there the life expectancy of females is the upper black line, for males is the lower black line, and for the sake of equality, we've brought them together, and life expectancy reaches the ripe old age of about 80. And that's what gives rise to that population. Interesting now, if you take a look at this population and you look at its age distribution, the black line is the age distribution of the population now, globally. So globally, the population is predominated by young people, but by the year 2100, the red curve, you can see a tremendous change in the age distribution of population. So even with a rather modest, if you like, projection of population, the consequences for age distribution are just enormous. And what you see there is probably more than 50% of the population over 50 years of age. The curve itself, age along the lower axis, right? And so each curve represents the number of people at each single year of age. What's of interest is the shape of the curve. So what you're seeing is 0 to 100 along that lower axis. And the black line is the age distribution, the age distributed population in about the year 2000, let us say, or 2005. So that's the end of the historical period. That's historical data. The red curve is the same data, but now projected forward to the year 2100. And that's the consequence of lowering fertility. So you lower fertility, fewer young people. We've increased life expectancy a little bit. So the consequence is this seriously aging population. I'm saying nothing at all about its distribution over geography. This is at the total scale. I tried to build a population that went to 9 billion before it leveled off, and you can see that is the green scenario. And it reaches somewhat just under 9 billion before it begins to go down rather seriously. How I got there was just to reduce fertility down to about 1.5 from 2.1. I also reduced life expectancy from 80 down to about 72. If you look at the consequence for the age distribution of the population now, the green curve is the age distribution of the population in the year 2100 for that green scenario. That's really frightening. If you look at that in terms of dependency ratios, this is the dependency ratio for young people, so this is the ratio of the people 0 to 15 years of age to the working population, so 16 to 65. But the dependency ratio for the older segment of the population, so this is the ratio of old people to the working population, is now just about even, a little less than even. So what we're saying is that for every person working, there is one old person who will not be. A tremendous change.